Video, I will be showing how to make a ball look like it's bouncing when the ball is made out of different materials. So this is going to be about keyframe animation and using the graph editor in Maya. So let's start with making a ball. So in the poly modeling menu here, let's just hit the sphere, and now you've got a ball. And you'll see that the ball is below the surface of the grid, and if we're going to use the grid as the surface that it's going to bounce on, we have to get it to rest on that surface. So we're going to take the translate y. Remember, y is like a tree growing out of the grid. Think of the y direction. And go from 0 to 1. And now we're going to be sitting on top of the grid. And the reason why is because I know that this sphere is 2 units large, and that's why if I raise it up by 1, you'll see that the center has 1 up, 1 down to make it 2 units large. And that's why I raise it up by 1. Okay, so that's the bottom. That's the bottom surface. So let's start with the ball in the air, and we'll then drop it down. So I'm going to start the ball at a height of 20. I put a number 20 in there, hit return, and the ball jumps up to number 20, height of 20. And I want to keyframe that. So I'm going to right click on the translate Y. It's the only one I'm going to be keying, is just the translate Y, because I'm just going to be going up and down, up and down, up and down. So that's the only direction I'm moving. And I'm going to hit key selected. Now, since I'm only going to be using the translate Y, I may as well use my auto key. This is the auto key over here, because that means anytime I move this, it will automatically make a key, and I won't have to keep going key selected, key selected, key selected all the time. It'll simply know once I've made a move that I mean to make a key there. So I'm going to go 14 frames down the road here, and I'm at 24 frames per second. So 14 frames, just over half a second, and I want to drop this down to the bottom using my move tool, or I could just simply put the number 1 in translate Y. And now I'm sitting there on the grid. Okay, so I went from 20 high to 1 in 14 frames. Now it's going to go back up. But when it goes back up, it's going to lose a little bit of height. It's not going to go all the way back up to 20. And also, it's going to start bouncing faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. So I have to make it lose height a little at a time, and also lose time. I have to do my keyframing faster and faster and faster and faster and faster to make this ball look like it's slowly coming to rest. So we went to 14, and I'm going to do it in pairs. I'll start with 14, 14, and then I'm going to drop by 2. I'll go 12, 12, then 10, 10, and then 8, 8, 6, 6, etc. So I'm going to do it in pairs and drop by 2s along the timeline. On the height, on the other hand, I want it to drop a little bit faster. So I'm going to drop it by 3s rather than 2. And I know this will look better because I've tried it before. So here we are at 14. And so I'm going to do pairs of 14. So I'm going to go to 28. And instead of going all the way back up to 20 for the height, I'm going to drop it by 3. I'm going to go to 17. And you see it automatically makes a keyframe. I don't have to do key selected or anything. It automatically does it. Because that's my first pair, 14 and 28. Now I'm going to drop by 2. So now I'm going to say 12s. So 28 and 12 is 40. And I'll drop it to the floor, 1. Go 12 more again, that's 52. And I want the height now to drop by 3. So I went from 20 to 17, and now I'm going to go 3 less, which will be 14. Sometimes it's hard to keep these numbers straight in your head, but you can always go back to a frame and say, what was the last one I just did? So we did 14, 14, 12, 12, and now I'm going to go 10s. 52 to 62 is 10. And I'll drop it to the floor. 62 to 72 is 10 more. And I was at 14, and now I'm going to go 3 down, and now it's going to be 11. 11 high. So I'm losing height by 3s, shrinking time by 2s in pairs. So I went 14, 12, 10s, and now I'm going to do 8. 72 and 8 is 80. I got to go to the floor again. Remember that number 11. I'm going to drop that by 3 in a moment. So I'm going to go to the floor. And 8 plus 8 now is 88. And I was at 11. So now I'm going to be at 8. So there's my pair of 8s. Now I'm going to go 6s. So 88 and 6 is 94 rather. 94, I got to drop it back down to 1. Remember that I'm at 8 high. And then 98. I was at 8 high, now I'm going to be 5 high. Okay, what were my numbers? That was 94 to 98. It was at 4s. Okay, so now I'm going to go to 2s. So 98 and 2 is 100. 5 high is now going, I have to drop it to 1 first, right? And then I have to go 102. And now I'm going to be 2 high. 5 minus 3 is 2. So I'm getting really low to the ground. And in fact, I'm so low to the ground at this point, I'm going to be kind of inexact now at the very end. So I'll drop it to 1, and I'm just going to be going single frames. I just wanted to get these little kind of vibration bounces at the end. And I'm not even going to use numbers that I'm going to put in here anymore, except for maybe on the floor. I want to make sure I'm at 1. I'm just going to kind of pull up a little bit, another frame, go back down to the floor. Better make it 1. I don't want it to go below the floor. Give it another frame, pull up a little bit, maybe a little less than last time. Another frame, go back down to the floor. Another frame, pull up a tiny, tiny bit. And then maybe the last one, I finally go to the floor and I'll say, okay, it's done bouncing. So these last ones, I'm just kind of eyeballing it because you really can't tell so much with these little vibrations at the end. How accurate that is. So you don't have to really be all perfect with the numbers. So let's see what this whole thing looks like. We did 109 frames. Let's go back to frame 1 by clicking here, and let's see what this looks like. So it's nicely getting lower and lower and lower and faster and faster and faster, but there's something wrong. It still doesn't look like a bouncing rubber ball. And the reason why is because the ball has no weight. It's going up and down at the same speed. And that's not how a rubber ball will behave in the presence of gravity. That's just not physics. Because what's going to happen in reality is that the ball is going to take a little time to pick up speed. So it takes time to pick up speed because of momentum. And then when it slaps against the floor, it's going to change direction pretty quick because it's going to have that slap back. It's got that impact on the floor. And then when it goes back up to the top, it's going to go slower and slower and slower until finally it stops for just a microsecond and then slowly starts picking up speed again before going down and slapping against the floor. So the speed has to change constantly. It has to go faster to slow as it goes up, and then slow to fast as it goes down. And then when it hits the floor, it has to change speed, change direction very quickly. So how do we do that? Because we have all of our keyframes right, but we have to change the rate that it changes speed. So that's where we get into the graph editor. And this is probably one of the most important things you can learn in animation, because this is what gives everything weight. Because you can control this and make things have weight. So under Windows, Animation Editor's Graph Editor, that's your first one that's going to show up. So the graph editor, what it does, it puts all your keyframes that you've just made on a graph. And here they are all nicely laid out. You can see that they get, this is the height over here. And you can see they get lower and lower and lower and lower. And the time goes faster and faster and faster and faster until finally it's just these little tiny bounces at the end. But the problem is we need to have it spend more time at the top and less time at the bottom, because right now it's equal. You can see these curves are equal. So great. So we can click one of these are called tangents right here, where it changes direction. And it'd be great if we could make this very sharp here at the bottom and very much more flattened at the top, so it can hang out at the top longer. But when I try to move this, you see it moves the other one with it, and that's not good. We need to move them individually. So what we have to do is called breaking the tangents. We have to break these tangents at the bottom so that they operate individually. So I'm going to pick all the ones at the bottom here by drawing a box, just by clicking and drawing a box. And just try and catch just the bottom ones. Looks like I caught a little extra down there, but I'm not too worried about it. So I've selected all the bottom ones, and I'm going to say tangents, break tangents. Now they will operate separately. So now just by playing with the bottom, I really don't even have to touch the top. I can move this to be sharp, and it will automatically make the top flatten out. So I'm going to do this individually with each one. And if yours don't move, it's because you don't have the move tool selected. If you have another tool like your selector or something like that selected, it won't move. So you have to have your move tool selected. So it's important that you don't flatten the top out too much, or it will seem like it's defying gravity and just hanging in the air, like some of these amazing basketball players that just sort of stay in the air. But it won't look real. And so you don't want to flatten the top too much, but you definitely need to flatten it out. And you also have to keep the left side and the right side exactly equal, or as much as you can tell by eye. Because if one is got a different shape to it than the other, that's going to look funny. It's going to look like somehow it changed speed in midair, and that just won't seem right. So you have to get the left side and the right side to be as close as you can to the same. You can just, by eye, just look at it. If it looks right to your eye, it's fine. You don't have to have it absolutely perfect. Now these little ones down here I want to do, but they're a little hard to see. So I can select all of these, and this is how I'm going to make this bigger. Is I hit F for focus, and it will now just focus on these, and everything becomes bigger. And by the way, moving around in the graph editor is the same as moving around in any other window in Maya, where you can hold your Option key and use like your mouse wheel, and you can zoom in and out. Or you could press the mouse wheel like a button and go left and right when you hold your Option key. So it's the same as any other window in Maya. All right, so I'm trying to get these to look as close as I can to, being a little flattened out. Trying to keep them looking the same. Oh, don't want that to happen. By the time you get to the bottom, again, it's not terribly important for these little tiny balances at the end. This is going to look a little weird, I think, because it has a different curve on each side. I might move this over. You can actually just drag it. Maybe not so good. It's sticking to one each. Here's frame 100 and frame 101, 102, 103. So it's just going right to the next frame. So I'm just going to just do it kind of by eye, make it look a little better there. Just don't want that bounce looking funny. So let's close this up and see what this looks like now. Much better. Something happened there. One of those bounces at the end. What happened there? Oh no, I guess it was just a weird glitch. Okay, so it looks pretty good. The only other thing we may want to do is do a little squash and stretch. If it's a rubber ball, one of those bounces is weird. I have to check that. Windows, animation editors, graph editors. It looks like one of the, everything's on the floor. Okay, I guess it was just my imagination. If something's off the floor, you'll see one of these lower ones will be too high. It'll suddenly rise up, and and that'll be a problem. Okay, so squash and stretch. We want to do some squash and stretch on this ball. So in other words, when it hits the surface, we want to squish it a little bit, and then we want it to immediately pop back into its original size. So here it is in the air, here it is on the ground. So we want to squash it, and I can use the scale tool to squash it right there. Problem is, you'll see it squashes it from the center, which means it makes it suddenly not hit the ground. And that's not good. So I don't want it to squash from the center. And the way I'm going to change that is make it so it squashes from the bottom. So I'm going to take my move tool, and I could change the center of where the move is going to occur from, or any other thing like rotate, scale, whatever. And if I hold my D key, D as in dog, it will, and I move this, it will not move the actual object. It will move the, I don't know, center of gravity, center of rotation, center of scale, center of everything, wherever you like. While you're holding the D key, it'll move it wherever you like. So I'm going to put it on the floor. Let go of the D key, go back to scale, and now if I squash it, it only squashes the ball but leaves the floor alone because that's the center of the squash. Okay, so that's pretty cool. Now, the problem is, if I just squash it here at the bottom, I need to have it at full size before it hits the bottom, squash at the bottom, and then immediately jump back to full size as soon as it bounces off. So I have to key it before it squashes and then after it squashes. So I'm going to remove the squash. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to go one key frame number 13, one before, and I'm going to keyframe the scale. Key selected, scale Y, that's the height. Just like up and down was the translate Y. And then I'm also going to key one later by hitting key selected. So now I've got 3 keys in a row that are on the scale Y. And now I can go to the middle one where it hits the floor and just squish it. And because I keyed before and after, it will automatically squish and then jump back to full size. So that's kind of a little trick. I mean, I could have fixed it before and after, but this way, since I already know that it's got to be full size before and after, if I just put those keys in before I do the squish, it's much faster. It's kind of a little trick. And so you might think, well, does it take too long to come back to full size? As you know, it's all the way up here. Your eye can't tell. It's going to happen so fast that it's going to look perfectly fine. So I'm going to do this now for every time it hits the floor up until I don't want any more squishing. So here's key 40 where it hits the floor again. And I'm going to go to 39 and say key selected, and 41 and say key selected. And then I'm going to go to the middle of those two and squish it. And then it will squash and then stretch back out. And I could even do a stretch. I mean, let's say, you know, in the first one, if I wanted to, I could say it stretches back up. But then at some point, it's going to have to go to full size again. So you could do a stretch if you want. I'm mostly concerned about the squash and then coming back to full size. So here's the next one. Again, I'm going to key one before and key one after. Oop, I missed that one. Sometimes it's hard to tell where the keyframe is with the playhead. And in the middle, I'm just going to squash it a little bit because I want it to squash less and less because the impact is getting less and less. I'm just going to do it one more time because it's getting so low now. I'm really not going to get much squash out of this thing, realistically. So this very last one here at 80, I'm just going to give it a little bit of a squash. Honestly, you probably won't even be able to see it. All right, so let's see what we got now. Let's back it up. Go back to frame 1. And we got squash and stretch. Rubber ball. And probably those last few bounces, you could make maybe a few more of them, maybe. They look like they get, like it comes to rest a little bit too soon. And I'm still seeing it looks a little funny on that. Yeah, sometimes it doesn't go all the way down. I guess this is a glitch that's happening here because on the graph, it definitely goes all the way down. And then half the time it does go all the way down. Not really sure why that's going on there. Okay, so there's a rubber ball. So how about different other materials? What about like a bowling ball? Well, a bowling ball is going to drop pretty quick. It will, the wind resistance isn't going to keep it from, isn't going to slow it down. It's not going to squash and stretch. A bowling ball is going to stay solid. So you're not going to have that. And it's not going to gain much height either, unless it's on like hits a rubber surface. But let's say a bowling ball that's hitting like a bowling alley floor, it's going to get a bit of bounce, but not that much. So maybe it's on the very first bounce, rather than dropping by 3 like I did it, it's only going to come up to like half of the original height. So let me open up what a bowling ball might look like. Maybe I'll save this as balloon ball. No, this is rather the rubber ball. Let's put a 2 on there. Okay. And here is what a bowling ball might look like. Something like that. So everything happens pretty quick. Doesn't really have much bounce to it. But it's got a bit because it's hitting this floor. And, the floor has some give and it throws it back up in the air. Maybe if it was hitting stone, like concrete, it wouldn't even bounce that much. So you can see all this happens here in less than 50 frames. This happens pretty quick. What about a balloon? So balloon, let's open up the balloon. Balloon's going to be very slow. And of course, there's different size of balloons, different weights of balloons. So you mostly just want it to appear to be a balloon, a believable balloon. So as long as you've got that, then you've got a balloon. It just has, you have to sell it as a balloon. In other words, your viewer has to look at it and go, I believe that's a balloon. So here's a balloon falling. And this happens very, very slowly. A lot of wind resistance. And it hangs out at the apex, at the top, for a long time before changing direction. Because there's just not much mass to it. But when it hits the floor, it has something to react with, and it bounces back up. So it's got really, really, really flat curves at the top. And you can see this whole thing takes a long time. I've used up 1,500 frames to make this come to rest. 1,500 at 24 frames per second. So we're looking at a pretty long animation here. Something like that. And the graph editor, there's all the keys. Not perfect, but it's pretty close. The graph editor is going to look kind of similar to the rubber ball, except that it's going to be even flatter at the top here. So that's about it. There's 3 different materials for a ball, and how you might approach making them look to be those materials, to sell those materials, so that a viewer looks at it and buys that that's what they're seeing for realism. So that's about it.